Welcome to the very first episode of our brand new podcast, The London Property Insider. Now, I'm going to introduce my guest, Russell Quirk, who is a renowned and quite outspoken property expert. This should be fun. Russell?
Well, thank you for that intro. I'm sure it will be fun. It always is. Whenever you and I have conversations about property, should be insightful.
Hopefully. So let's start with the first question, I think, is discuss why we think London is such a lucrative investment for both domestic and international investors.
So there's a phrase that I'd use, I think you use it too, which is that London will always be London. Now, I know that sounds like an obvious kind of sweeping thing to say, but I mean that in the context that, London is seen, I think particularly from the point of view of foreign investors, as a bit of a jewel in the crown. It's a bit of kind of trophy destination for property purchase. First of all, because of the grandiose nature of London. Our traditions, our royal family, our retail, our Harrods, our Ritz, and so there is definitely a kudos, if you like, an ambience to buying in London. Lots of people want to be able to say, they have a property near Hyde Park, they have a property that is within 30-second walk of Harrods, or whatever that might be, or that he gentrified Shoreditch and so on. So I think there's a kudos, which I think is unrivaled by almost any other city. But the other thing is, although lots of different countries have, I guess they lay claim to having political stability, economic stability itself. And although, Britain over the last few years has certainly gone through the mill a bit in terms of those political and economic upsets, generally, it is stable.
Yep.
And above all, not only are our economic and political dynamics pretty consistent, we have probably the most trusted banking system in the world.
Yeah.
And I think, if you're thinking about investing, whether you're in Qatar, whether it's Singapore, whether you're in Hong Kong, China, wherever you are, I think London just ticks more boxes than any other city.
But why do you think that makes it lucrative?
Well, because if you've got demand from Qatar, China, now apparently the United States,
yes,
lots of people,
big buyers,
that
are double dushes.
Exactly. And with American politics, it tends to be quite extreme. You go from the kind of left-leaning Biden to the rather right-leaning Trump, and of course, in an election where 48% of people vote one way and 52% of people vote the other way, it's binary, and therefore the people that kind of lose out flee, and they do go. So I think we see that a lot. So when you've got huge demand from all over the world for London property, and that demand pushes prices up. London ebbs and flows, of course, but if you look at the last 20 years or so, property prices generally, they might do that a little, but property prices generally go up. But the big thing, I think, from an investment point of view, rather than just a purchase point of view, is that rents are always lucrative.
Yeah, I think that was the thing I was going to ask you. So I think the rental market is the key thing that drives the market. That drives any investment, frankly. Even lots of people want to invest into London. If there's no rental market below it, like there are in lots of other countries that generate a good yield, that's a big problem. I mean, for us as a business, one of the key drivers is students, actually. And lots of people say they don't want students, but there were 750,000, 750,000 international students studying in the UK.
Yeah.
And all of them need a home, so some go into halls, but a lot rent private. And the fish is big.
And I think London is very different to other cities in the UK, where London is it attracts more lucrative renters, even students. Britain currently has about 700,000 people net coming to its shores every year. A big chunk of that is students and their their family and so on. So I think for all of those reasons, London will always be lucrative because not only is there demand, so you're very unlikely to not venerate your property or to have void periods, but also because rents quite consistently increase.
Yeah, I think the rental market is the true thing that drives it. I mean, we're now seeing, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were seeing yields in London of 4.5%. That was pretty much, if you could get 5, you were way out, and we weren't suggesting that. Whereas today, we can see yields as high as 6% in London because the rents have moved up. Post-COVID, they went up a lot, and demand is so strong for renters. Even though the sales market has been quite flat, it has gone up a little bit, but it's been quite flat. That's helped yields, and that's good for investors.
I think it is. So that's the yield based on if you bought a property now, the yield would be as much as 5 or 6%, which is phenomenal, by the way. There are some cities in Britain, some parts of the world where you're lucky to get 2 to 3 year deal. However, I think what investors need to understand is that investment in property, of course, is a long-term thing. You don't invest for a year,
No.
3 years.
No.
You take a 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer. What happens as consequence of capital appreciation, of course, think about what your yield will be in 10 years' time, based on already in 10 years of London, based on what you paid 10 years previous.
Yes.
More like 10 or 11%.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing I think is important, and you may or may not agree with this, is I think debt is really important and finance. And a lot of our clients in Southeast Asia, they don't like getting debt, but actually it's debt that amplifies the return. So if you buy a property for 500,000 and half of that is debt, you only borrow 50%. Your yield, as your mortgage gets paid down, amplifies hugely.
What? Because you're getting a yield effects from a capital employed. So, I mean, I would strongly suggest if you've got £500,000 to invest in London property, buy 2 properties once, but they should, because the ROI, the return on your cash, is far, far, far higher.
What about, why do you think it's lucrative for domestic buyers? Because it's the same for international, or they have this different dynamic?
Because whether we like it or not, there have been lots of political efforts over the years to level up and to kind of powerhouse the North. I mean, these are all phrases that have been used by UK politicians for years. And I think that's laudable. But unfortunately, the resistance has always been that London and the South East, the home counties, account for about 40% of British GDP. So you've got a very small part of Britain geographically accounting for a huge part of our GDP. We're never going to get away from that. No. We are an incredibly strong financial centre. And yes, we can argue which one's strongest. Is it Frankfurt? Is it Hong Kong? Is it New York? What we have, of course, as something that can never be changed, is we have the luxury and the big benefit of time, and in the time zone that London works to. Where I remember when I worked in the city, you come in at 7 o'clock in the morning and Asia was going strong, finished 2 or 3 hours later. As they finished, New York opened and so on. There is no other place in the world, really, bar maybe, I don't know, South Africa and others on our timeline, that has that benefit. So as a consequence, the financial strength of London is always going to be outposed. That therefore creates employment, demand. Therefore, if you're encouraging lots and lots of people into the city and into peripheral industries around that, yes, of course, if people are moving into the city and earning money, they also need other facilities and services. The kind of the micro, if you like, micro economy that is London and the surrounding area in terms of products, services, and suppliers is huge and unrivaled. And for all of those reasons, I think London's completely unopposed.
I agree. And I think it's a capital city. And as an investment destination, I think it's almost a country in its own right and an investment plus.
And and as I say, so there's a proportion of Britain. Look, Manchester, very, very strong city for, let's say, retail, for fashion, for manufacture. I'm not wishing to diss other cities in Britain. But no city in Britain, let alone the world, I think can ride all of those boxes. I think the tick. And no, we're biased because we're sitting in your office. Yeah, with your many offices in London. But I think the facts speak for themselves. I just don't think they can be argued.
No, I agree. Actually, it's quite interesting. So that's the bigger picture. Let's talk about. I always use the word bulletproof when I talk about London property as an investment. I think London property is a bulletproof for long-term wealth creation. So why do you think that is? We've been through economic challenges. There are all sorts of issues going on globally and affect the UK. Why do you think that is?
Sure, because I think no matter what happens, and we're going through a period now, politically and economically, of uncertainty. We've got a war in the Middle East, we've got a war in India and Pakistan, we've got a war in Ukraine. I think not only is London strong for all the reasons that we set out, but comparatively compared to pretty much anywhere else in the world, if you want to be glass half empty, Mark, about it, I would say that London is the best, worst option.
Yes.
If you know what I think. So I, as you could probably tell, I'm a massive fan of London property. My grandfather started his property business here in Fulham, T50s, here in Fulham, T50. So I am attached to London property. I live and breathe it. I love it, and I'm a huge fan of it. But at the same time, as I say, I think there's no doubt that it has lots and lots of advantages, lots of strong points. But compared to an America that is politically polarized and dividing. Other parts of the world where, there's nothing more uncertain than war. And we have war in at least 3 or 4 parts of the world right now. And that creates huge uncertainty, huge disruption to capital markets. You also happened to gold recently. A friend of mine's a gold trader, and I'd just been away with him on a bit of a lad's road trip. And we had an argument about gold, and he was saying that gold is the thing. And I was saying, fun enough, I think it's London property. This way, how can you say that? So because you just traded gold during the old tariff Trump period, and he's done very, very well out to it indeed. I said, what then happens to gold? It comes off because all of a sudden there's another political announcement and gold comes off 10%. Yeah, if you bought at the top, you sort of 10% of your money. Yeah, it doesn't happen in UK. No. UK property is stable, it's consistent, and as I say, particularly in London. So I think comparatively to the rest of the world, I think London's a safe haven.
What about, and I agree, I think it is a safe haven, and it's an asset class, all absurd, as I said, where it's quite trusted and people invest in it because you look for a long time. I think the other thing that people forget about property, comparing all other asset classes, is the fact if you own gold or shares, what does everybody do? Every day you look at where the price is, Bitcoin's the worst because at the moment you wake up in the morning, you're sick because it's dropped 20% and it's very volatile. London property, who looks in their KICE? Who looks at the value? You just know you paid £500 million, and when you come to selling off a price, unless you refinance. So it's so much hands off, and you're not worried, and that's so nice.
So you don't need to worry about capex, the cap depreciation. That will look after itself, and it will ebb and flow. Some years it will be 0.5% up, some 1%, some 3%. Sometimes it might drop 0.5%, but it all comes out the wash. All you need to worry about is, have you got a good tenant?
Yeah.
Are they paying?
Yeah.
And without kind of blowing smoke too much towards Ben and Rees here, that is why, as I'm sure you'll come to, the choice of a proper London management agent.
Yeah, I think having a good agent is really important. But we can talk about agents in a sec. Let's talk about property market update, where the market is. Interest rates have come down. Where do we think they're going?
So yes, as we record this, interest rates just 4 or 5 days ago were reduced again, so they're now 4.25%. So anybody here on a variable or a tracker mortgage has just saved money. What's interesting as well, though, is fixed rate mortgages, both for purchase and remortgage and buy-to-let, are now starting to hover underneath 4% for the first time since pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
So that's very, very encouraging. So the trend for interest rates, particularly if inflation is a bit more of a threat. Bear in mind in the UK right now, inflation is 2.5% to 3%.
Probably 6%. It was last summer.
So it's not high by any stretch, particularly compared to the rest of the world. And here, where a year or two ago, it 10, 11, 12%. So inflation, I think, is under control. But I think if there are slight doubts about, I guess, what I would call the retail economy on a day-to-day basis, particularly because it's very political. We've just had a couple of budgets. They can be debated in terms of their merits or otherwise. And I think the Bank of England, obviously, who have an independent mandate to make sure the economy and inflation are under control, there is no doubt, and all of my friends in the city say this, that rates are going to continue downwards.
So what do you think? What's your prediction for the end of the year?
For the end of the year, I suspect it will definitely be with a 3. So we're at 4.25% now.
I think 2 cuts.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, 3.75, possibly even 3.5%.
Wow. And now here, Russell Quirk predicting 3.5% in your face, which is fun.
And there will be people, particularly domestic Inuit, that's still higher than I fixed that 4 or 5 years ago, when, of course, post-COVID interest rates were slashed to 0.1%. Unfortunately, over the last 5 or 6 years, anyone that's got a mortgage where they're at 1.5% to 2% fixed, they now think anything higher than that.
Yeah, and it's high.
It's really not. I think you and I are probably old enough to remember. I certainly am, maybe I'm not, but I certainly am. Interest rates at 10, 11, 12%.
I don't remember that, but the first mortgage I ever took out was my flat. I paid 7.25% from the biggest high street lender, and that was just the rate. Yeah. And I'm in the same position as you. I don't know how I was lucky, but I fixed my home loan in December 2020, and I got 1.49%. So I have a very nasty shock coming. However, I think rates around 4% are feasible. I think rates of 2% are ridiculous, and you can't run a market on.
I don't pretend to be an economist, but there is this kind of this philosophy of is it 3, and 3, which is 3% interest rates, 3% inflation, 3% unemployment, or thereabouts. And we're kind of there. We've had unemployment numbers out today as we record this, which shown a very, very slight tick upwards. But unemployment is still only 4.5% of all of those in Britain that are economically active. That's really low. That's low. So you've got low unemployment, rather high employment, but unemployment, low interest rates, wage growth here in Britain. This is a really interesting point. Wage growth in Britain is about 5 to 5.5%. So we've got wages outstripping house prices, which only just. So house prices are at 3 to 4% higher than they were this time last year, roughly, depending on the index. So we've got wage growth outstripping house prices and outstripping inflation. That's a really encouraging place.
It is. I think it's a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, what does that do? They say markets thrive on sentiment. I can tell you, talking to you and other people that I know in property a lot around appetite and sentiment. With all of these kind of stars aligning, where there's no drama in terms of what might be coming down the tracks property-wise, it's clear that the property market in the UK, certainly I think for the next 6 to 12 months, is in a really good place.
I think it's a good, strong place. There are challenges within it, but I think it's a good place. But I think the interesting thing is, we're going to turn on to rentals in a minute, is that if you're looking at investment, I think the key time to invest is when you're ready. What you should not do is pick a time and not be ready. You have to be prepared to do that, and you have to have the deposit and all your ducks in a row. No one can ever buy at the bottom, and no one ever sells at the top. You just have to manage that well. We've talked about how stable it is.
Considerable storage. In fact, you might have been there because I as you know, I run panels with any of the property investors show, and you were on one very recently. They invited you to, which I couldn't make because I was away. But the previous panel, which I think was in October, I had an audience full of landlords, and they're all a bit grumpy because interest rates hadn't started dropping, and because, as I'm sure we'll come on to the Rental Rights, the Rental Rights Act. And then this gentleman in the audience put his hand up to ask a question. He said, I'm a landlord of 7 properties. And he's saying there, so I'm done. I said, so let's dissect that for a little while, shall we? I said, so why are you doing that? He said, I'm worried about the Renters' Rights Act. We'll come on to that. I'm a bit miffed with government, and I thought that landlords are being attacked. I said, okay, fine. So let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, where are you going to put your money instead? So when you cashed out of your several properties, are you going to stick in the stock market? Are you going to stick into gold or commodities? What are you going to do? Because I would suggest that those things are far more precarious. He said, oh, okay, fair enough. He said, I haven't quite decided. He said, maybe the stock market. I said, well, sure, you wouldn't be doing that though, with what's going on with Trump and with the UK, being a little bit volatile. So, but then I asked him a second question, which kind of hinges on what I said just now, I suppose, which is, what are you getting for yield? He's getting 4 or 5%, but that's pretty good, really, London-based. I said, so you've worked out, though, on the price of the property as it was valued today. He said, oh, yeah, of course. He said, that's how you work out yield. I said, no. I said, in real pounds, shillings, and pence, as we call it here, what is your yield based on paying actually first price? So, and with your own, he said, well, my oldest property, I bought 50 years. I said, wow. I said, so can't I suggest you get a spreadsheet out, you put down your 7 properties, what you paid for them, and what the rent is now, and then work out the yield, and then come back to me in a few weeks' time and tell me if you're still going to sell those properties.
Exactly, because
and do you know what he said? He said, that's fair enough.
Because if you put the money in the bank and you put 100,000 pounds in the bank and you're getting 5% a year, your capital value doesn't increase because you're taking the yield, which
especially with inflation at 2%.
You're getting 2%. Let's talk quickly about the rental market update and see where the rental market's going. I mean, the average rent at the moment is £2,700 per month, which is 11.5%. The ONS is saying 11.5% more than last year. Where do we think rents are going, and why are they dropping?
They just keep going up and up and up, don't they? Which, if you're a would-be renter watching this, you're going to be a bit upset about that. But look, agents don't set. By the way, this is true. Agents don't set the market. The market governs itself, and the agent reflects that. So it's not Mark's fault if rents go up. But as a landlord, it's a good thing, of course. If your rents are increasing by 6, 7, 8%, as we have seen over the last few years, and why? It's simply because, and it's kind of school economics, I suppose, is that there is more demand than supply.
Yeah.
That sounds like an obvious statement, but let me just put that into context a little bit. You've got 2 things going on in Britain right now. You've got an absolute lack of housing supply.
Yeah.
So we build, if we're lucky, about 200,000 new homes a year. Current government has said they want to build 350,000. That's not going to happen. But all sorts of reasons we can go into on another podcast, perhaps. we will not build 350,000 new homes as required. So you've got a deficit in terms of what's needed versus what's built. But at the same time, 700,000 people net migration in the UK.
728,000 to be.
728,000. So you've got more people coming to Britain. And forget the whole immigration argument. I personally think immigration, if it's selective and controlled, is a very, very good thing for Britain. But we do have more people coming than leaving. But you also have a couple of other dynamics, which is we now have in Britain, and in London, I suspect it's even worse, is a significant amount of people, about 25%, live on their own.
Yeah.
So they're living as sole occupants, which means the housing stock has to go further.
Yeah.
And it's not. So you've also got house prices that have obviously gone up and up and up, turmoil in the mortgage market, I suppose, in terms of interest rates, although they're lower now over the last 2 or 3 years. So the alternative has to be to rent. If you've got that incredible demand versus supply, only one thing is ever going to happen.
Is it going to go?
Rents are going to go.
I agree. And I think we're seeing that now. And we're seeing that certainly as a business. We're running at just under 20 people for every property, applicants for every single property. If some of the properties we have, which are lower value, smaller units, we put them on a Friday and we take them off on a Monday because we're deluged with enquiries. It's just mad. And I do think rents will keep going up, but I don't think we're going to see the same level of increases this year. There has been a lot of turmoil going on with people coming in and people leaving. High value, high net worth people is all over the press, millionaires leaving the UK. I don't think it's been as bad as it's being set out. However,
they might be leaving, but I don't think they're selling their properties.
Yeah, well, maybe they're not selling. But I think rents will actually see 3% growth this year. I don't think we'll see 6 to 8%, but we'll see. But let us conveniently move on to the Renters' Rights, the Renters' Rights Bill, which is coming in, called the Renters' Reform Bill, is now the Renters' Rights Bill. Do you know about that? Do you want to tell us, or do you want me to go through it?
Well, go through go through the highlights if you want. But look, it is quite a change to the tenant versus landlord dynamic.
Yeah.
Look, if we want to be political about it for a second, we can argue that there is a left-leaning ideology to it in that it seeks to favour tenants.
It does.
But I mean, why don't you go through the bullet points, and then I'll give you my opinion on what the effect is.
So the bullet points. Let me firstly say that we have a lot of landlords who've been very frightened about this, and a lot of clients are terrified about it. But my view is that actually there's nothing to worry about. I did a webinar internally for all our staff, so everybody understands what's coming. So the point that you have to think when you look at the renters' rights is, why are they doing that? Because they go on what charities and social housing and
the
bodies that help tenants help them to try to guide government in that. So they're saying that some poor single mother with 4 children living outside London is evicted and has no home, and the landlord just wants to kick her out and she wants to live there forever. Now, if you're a landlord as an investor, then actually, why would you not want to have a long-term tenant? No change. If someone lives in your property for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, they treat it like it's their home. So they change the bulb themselves. They look after it like it's their home. So actually, long-term tenants is fantastic for investors like me. No void, no in and out costs, maybe a bit of decorating, but actually no costs. But actually, I think is long-term. The long-term benefits actually are clear when you really cut down what they're saying. But the key things are they're ending Section 21 evictions, which is meaning that it's no-fault eviction, kicking out a tenant just because you don't like them. And one of my clients said to me in Hong Kong, funny enough, a month ago, said, but what if I don't like them? Well, you buy an investment in BP shares and you don't like the CEO, you can't kick him out. Yeah. And actually, it's the seller and premises. You have a tenant. The fact that you don't like it, you certainly can't not like it because she's not white, because that will be illegal anyway. You can't not like her because she's a woman, because that will be sexist, and you can't do that. You might not like her because, or this tenant because they pay the rent late. Well, you can do something about it. You'll be able to continue. But she's your tenant looking after your home and should stay there as long as she pays the rent and looks after it for you and isn't antisocial, all of which they're going to address.
But there is a reality, which is that the government, this one and the previous one actually, which was supposed to be a bit more right-leaning, but anyway, leave that there for a second. They took the view of this so-called no-fault evictions thing actually being valid. Now, there has never been, ever, a situation where if you are a tenant within a short hold tenancy agreement in place, that you can be evicted unless you don't pay the rent, of course, which would then be fine. So the no-fault eviction thing only happens if that person is outside of their tenancy agreement. So the whole thing is a fantasy. It's a fallacy.
But the difference is the point now. It's going to be there'll be no fixed term tenancy. So a tenant can any tenancy that starts and the rent you agree at the beginning can stay as long as they want to, so long as they pay the rent on time, they look after the property properly, and every year the landlord could put the rent up. So my things against this were, well, what if I want to get my property back because I want to sell it? You can, because they're allowing that. You'll have to give 4 months notice, but if you're selling, the UK is sadly good investment model, but it's sadly not the fastest.
Well, if you want to move back into the
And
property,
if you want to move back in, you could give the same 4 months notice. If you want to put the rent up, you're able to put it up once a year. You can't double the rent or triple the rent. You can increase it to the market level, and there will be ways to set that. And so actually, I think it's solidifying the rental market. So in retrospect, having looked at it, I don't think it's a bad thing. There are some slight niggles around it for investment, like you can't ask for rental payments up front. So if you have somebody coming from Saudi Arabia and they've got a job here and they're on probation, in the past, we would ask for 6 months, quarter, a year's rent in advance. You can't do that.
but you can still ask for a guarantor.
Now you can ask, and you were always able to ask for a guarantor. Now there are guarantee companies out there that will act as guarantor, and it will just cost the tenants. And so unfortunately, the government has just lumped the cost onto the tenants.
Yep.
Same with students. So we have lots of students from China, Hong Kong, Asia, who come, the US, who come. And again, they're going to need a UK guarantor. And there already are these UK guarantors. I met one last week who have 15,000 guarantees out there for universities. So that shouldn't be a problem.
But the rent increases, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yes.
So the legislation will now say not that you can't increase rent, you can, and you can do that once per year, and it has to be reasonable and within market conditions. Well, that's very ambiguous.
It is.
Because if you can prove that, as we just said, if the market is increasing by 5, 8, 9, 10% per annum, your argument as a landlord is, well, look, that's the rent.
There were going to be indexes, and there was argument they were going to try to say for the first 4 years it was going to do RPI. Now, I don't know if that's going to come in. That's not been settled.
Looks like it's market.
There will just be a market rent, which means we will have to prove that this flat or you as a landlord. And again, if you don't use an agent, you have one shot at it, because the tenant will be able to engage straight to a tribunal, and during that period, you won't be able to see an increase, and the tribunal will decide. So it's really important to make your things stack up and make sure you know when the rent is on. So again, you can put the rent on. For me as a landlord, I let the tenants get onto it. I want as much rent as possible to make it. But if I could put the rent up, what's wrong? And if I could sell, or I could get the tenant out for my kids to move in or me to move in, then it's great. And I still maintain it doesn't put me off. There are other restrictions in there against no one listening today, but there are, unfortunately, not the greatest tenants, landlords out there who don't maintain properties well. And there was that awful case with the young child that died from mold. Now, that they say will stop. But the reality is they need to have proper compliance to check this.
You introduced me at the beginning as being opinionated and controversial. I'm going to say something that was true, but some people think it's controversial. The worst landlords in Britain are not private landlords, they're not overseas investors, they're social landlords. They are housing associations. And that tragic, horrible case of that young lad losing his life through mold, that was a registered social landlord, not a private landlord, not an overseas investor. It wasn't Mr. and Mrs. Miggins from Aylesbury that had put all their pension money into a flat. It was a housing association. They're supposed to be government regulated. That's the problem that needs to be solved, not ordinary, hard-working, legitimate landlords who make up most of the fabric of the landlord dynamic in Britain.
Well, I'll add something else on controversial, because Russell did that. So I say to lots of people, if they ever listen, actually, the government have wanted to drive our market into a much more of a private rented sector, i.e. big corporates only. And my view is we have lots of them and they own a building here. They're generally more expensive than private landlords. If it's me and I have my tenant been there for 5 years and I like the tenant, I'm going to do what she wants to keep her and not be so aggressive on the rent. A fund looks at a spreadsheet, say all the rents go up by 6%, and that's it. Number one is that. Number two, when these big funds have got together, this is my controversial bit, when they got together enough stock, they want to exit because they're a fund, right? They want to make money for their ultimate investors. Who will they sell to when they own 1 million homes? It will sell to an overseas,
Or a pension fund.
Not necessarily a pension fund. I'm thinking of a sovereign fund. And when the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Fund or Qatari Investment Authority or China Sovereign Fund own 1 million homes in the UK, I'd hate to be the
Well,
brightest
I heard it, and look, a message to tenants here is, again, be careful what you wish for, because the tenants actually and their activist groups, as you say, the likes of Shelter and so on, have really pushed for this legislation. And as I've said, again, very controversially in the past on social media, which I've been castigated for, what would you do, not just without landlords, but without ordinary individuals that are landlords? Because if you get into trouble and you need a month off, or you have fallen on hard times, you've lost your job temporarily, working hard to get another one and so on, and you want to ring your landlord or WhatsApp them and say, can you just hold off on that increase for 2 or 3 months? Most landlords that are individual will be sympathetic. Try doing that if it's BlackRock or Ellen.
Impossible.
Good luck.
It's impossible. And with a fund, social as well, they don't care because they follow a procedure and you can't even speak to anybody. Anyway, that's neither. So I hope that you've got the upshot of that. Actually, the renters' rights bill is a big change coming, and it will come in this year. But I don't think it's terrible for landlords. There will be things and then tweaks and not enough resource in the courts, but actually, I don't think it's terrible for the wider global market. And it certainly shouldn't put anybody off.
Yeah, there's certainly not going to be a situation where tenants decide to move in and move back out again 3 months later. Why would a tenant do that? Particularly if they've got kids. The kids are settled in school. They like the area that they've chosen to move to. So I think I actually think the government should have done the opposite, and to provide, as they do in Germany, for instance, the opportunity to have 10, 15, 20-year leases with built-in mechanisms for rent increases and so on. So I think we've done the wrong thing, but I don't think when it comes to, because tenants know, of course, if they had to struggle to find a property because they were one of 20, well, they don't want to leave because then they've got the problem again of finding somewhere else. So I think any landlord angst or anxiety around the new act, I think is probably misplaced.
I totally agree. I don't think you just worry. It's obviously going to come out. There may be changes, but I don't think it's a worry. You mentioned at the beginning talking about having a good agent. So
let's talk about you.
Let's talk a little bit about Ben & Breeze, because I think it's my favorite topic. But that's what we like talking about a little bit. And so we honestly, we built the business. Anita Mayer is my MD, and myself, we have built this business around trying to offer a good level of personal service. My business cards have my mobile number on it. You find an agent, top 20 agent who put their mobile number on their business cards. They don't, because they don't really want clients calling them. We regularly meet with clients and we address things when things go wrong. And if we do it, we will fix it. But I think it's really important that helping clients is the most important thing we do, and trying to give decent advice and work our way through the myriad of compliance issues and issues with properties and tenants that we come across. And I think that's really important, offering that kind of one-stop shop. And I think that's really important.
No, I agree. I think it's all about reputation, and Benhams absolutely have I would say, gold-plated reputation in terms of being a source to go and find a property from a tenant's perspective, but also from a landlord's perspective, to know that you're going to be compliant, you're going to give them proper advice and guidance, particularly where things are changing so much in the landlord space right now. Knowing that client money is protected. There have been, maybe not so much recently, but in Britain, like most countries, every now and again in the past, you've heard of a small, less legitimate letting agency going off with the rent, or indeed not placing a deposit in one of the 3 legitimate tenancy, landlord-tenant deposit custodial schemes. So I think, and again, I don't want to be an advert for Benhams here, but I think it's very, very clear that not all letting agents and management agents are the same. And the last thing, and I think this is true of everything in life now, the last thing you do is get on the phone and ring 5 agents for the cheapest rate. Again, be careful what you wish for.
I agree. I think, look, we get asked all the time for discounts, and we do offer within a reason of what, depending on what the client fit, you have to look at to be competitive. But are we the cheapest? Absolutely not. There are people out there that will do it for 0. And, if that's what you want, that's what you should go for. But as Russell said, be very careful what you end up with, because you want to pay nothing, but then when something goes wrong, you get stuck.
Let me use an analogy. So when it's your anniversary, if you were to apply the same approach to the restaurant you choose as your choice of letting agent, you'd end up saying to Mrs. von Grundherr, I found somewhere really cheap, really good value. We're going to McDonald's.
Well, go down a street at my house.
I know it might seem an extreme.
I don't know that's the cheapest.
No, but you could go somewhere lovely where the service is impeccable. You know the food is going to be brilliant. And okay, the bill is going to be a little bit higher than KFC or McDonald's, to continue the ridiculous analogy. But I'm serious. You get what you pay for.
You do. Look, as I said, there are you should be conscious of the costs because that's really important. But I think it's really equally important. We are not talking about just finding a tenant. We're talking about finding a good tenant that's going to stay long term. We're talking about if the tenant has struggles paying the money, who's going to go around and knock on the door? If you have a problem with dilapidations or damage or neighbors or keys going missing and all of the kind of stuff that you don't think about when you are just looking online for the cheapest. I mean, people always do that when they're buying. They look for the cheapest person who's going to do the legal fees. And I'm not saying you have to go to...
There's a saying, pay cheap, pay twice.
Well,
let me ask you a question. You didn't know I was going to ask you this. So when it comes to tenant selection, which I think will be even more important in the future in terms of making sure it's a proper quality tenant that's been referenced and checked out properly. And actually, I think the instinct as an agent, having met them, shown them around the property and so on, is as important as the credentials and the referencing. Do Benhams ever say no to a tenant?
Yeah, we do actually. This is very interesting. I think that's really interesting. So we use a very, very small referencing agency that were ex-agents that all work from home and they reference them down to there. And they are very careful. And we often see, in fact, I had my own property recently where I want a rental insurance on every single tenant. If I can get it, I want it. And they came and they said, 2 tenants, they're very nice, 2-bedroom flat, I might add. And they're very nice. They seem to be because we met them, but both of them are on probation working for companies. So you can't get rental insurance. That what you want to do, take up front or whatever. So what do? I just wanted to see what would happen. In fact, I did take the money up front in the end. I re-referenced them through another agency and they gave me a pass with a rental insurance.
Wow.
Now, my view on that is some landlords will say, well, actually, that's all right. I've got a rental insurance. What do I care? Can you imagine, though, the problems that you go through trying to play insurance?
And landlords, particularly overseas, should understand that if your agent recommends a tenant, because they've referenced them through a third-party referencing agency who has said, yeah, they're fine, if it goes wrong in terms of non-payment, arrears or whatever, there is no comeback on the agent or that referencing company whatsoever. So really important that you make sure that the agent you choose is legitimate, bona fide, established, experienced. I mean, seriously, really. But
I think honestly,
probably the best advice we can give in this.
Honestly, that's the best advice, making sure the agent does a good job. But I do think references we've harped on about a bit of that is the fundamental bit about that person who's going to live there, because there are criminal gangs in London, because there's lots of money, as you say, in the market, who will create a website, create a dodgy reference, do all of this to pass through the system. And, our referencing agency at the moment see 1 forged passport every 10 days. So that's 2.5, 5 every 2 months. That's quite a forged passport. I mean, I'm like shocked when I hear that. I'm different when I see forged bank statements, and you'd be amazed. Forged bank statements on HSBC all looked fine to me. And they go, who goes to Boots every single day and spends £2.24? Because what they've done is they've copied the page, and some of them are cleverer, but you can see them forged, and it's really interesting.
You've got to be careful.
Anyway, I think that's important. But we do cover the whole of London, and we offer a decent service, and it's all on our website. And I think we really try very hard. I would say the one thing I always say is, look, we make mistakes, as everybody does. I'm the worst. I'm sure I make loads of mistakes, but we do have landlords who can have very high expectations, and sometimes it's not achievable. We have tenants who have incredibly high expectations, whether they're a student, because we have a student at the moment paying £120,000 a year rent, a single Chinese lady, 120,000. You can imagine who her father is, and so her expectation is off the hook high.
Yeah.
And I have landlords who are high, and unfortunately have properties that leak, the heating doesn't work, and all these problems. So unfortunately, I'm putting in 3 really difficult factors that sometimes it's hard to manage, but we try very hard to make sure.
I guess this podcast is going to be seen and heard by people overseas. One thing that really fascinates me about Benhams is the amount of languages that your staff speak. How many is it now?
I don't know. It's quite...
I mean,
I think
a lot.
Actually, I think it's more than 50 actually. But we try and we have our overseas offices. It's interesting you said that. So we have overseas offices in places Hong Kong, Singapore, KL, the UAE, and China and South Africa in order to deal with people that are based there, whether they're coming to rent here or landlords who are based there. And we speak multi-languages. We have a Japanese team based in London, 9 people work that deal with just Japanese companies and their employees moving to London. We are the second largest um, uh, company that now deals with Japanese tenants. And what does that mean? The interesting thing with Japanese tenants, and this is not me saying they're the best tenant, because of course everybody's an equal tenant, but they take their shoes off at the property, which people seem to like. Secondly, they always pay the rent on time. Even during COVID, not one Japanese tenant asked for a discount. Not one, not one. And we today have this big team that looks after them. And so we had Japanese, we have a Chinese desk as well, Middle Eastern desk. We are here to help the whole market. And I still maintain that, yes, a lot of the larger agents have a similar offering, but it's not as personal and service driven. So I think we've talked for quite a long time.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've covered a lot of ground. I think recap on where the market's going to go.
Look, just positive. I mean, no one can see 2 or 3 years into the future, but I think if we take a view to the end of 2025, tenant demand will stay strong. Landlords don't have much to worry about. Property values will increase in London and the rest of the UK, and indeed rents will continue to increase. And we can debate whether that's 3%, 4%. I actually think it's probably nearer 5%. I think, but it's all positive.
I agree. I think we're going to see capital growth, and to be fair, I think it'll be 3 to 4%. I think rents will be 3 to 4%. I think we'll see inflation stick around 2.5%, maybe tick up a little bit, but we'll certainly see those interest rates coming out. I hope he's right. We're going to see 3.5%. I really hope so by the end of the year. But I maintain that this is still a very solid place for investment. So recap is, it's still good to invest if you're ready. You can get good deals, and the yields are higher than they were, and interest rates are coming down. So I think it's a good, no worries place.
And the other thing is, if you're a current landlord with properties in London, you'd be mad to sell.
I think you would be mad to exit. I wouldn't exit. Why? If you're in it.
Well, hang on. If you're not, and you're the man in the know, if you were offloading your stuff, then I think people, you're buying.
My personal view is I bought something last year, but my view is that actually you've already paid all those soft costs. So the lawyers' fees, the stamp duty. Yes, you've got income tax on your income. Yes, you do, but you won't have it in Dubai. But as a UK resident, you would have it in Dubai because you pay when you repatriate the money. So actually, I think the UK market is very strong. There are some taxes to pay, but if you are in it, you must be mad to be exiting. And especially if you're worried about the renters' rights bill, because that shouldn't be a worry for you.
Don't be.
You can add kids on. I've added my kids on to my properties in order that we spread it. I have to survive 7 years. God, I hope I do. But I think that's really good, and that's why it's so good. Look at the wealthiest people in the UK, save for the tech billionaires or Tom Ford who just arrived. But you look at who the wealthy, they're landowners, and land is the issue because we have UK has limited land. It's not like Dubai. Let's be honest, it's the desert. And when they sell out this building today,
they build another 100,000 units.
And they've got another one, and they've got another one, and they talk about net migration in Dubai at 20,000 a month.
Well, shall I give you a quick stat just before we go with regard to London? So Sadiq Khan, who's in fact, Sir Sadiq Khan now, the mayor of London, and I promise I won't get political here. I'm not his biggest fan. However, in 2016, when he was elected, so 9 years ago, he said we need to build 65,000 homes each year, every year for the foreseeable future. He has only delivered on about 25% of that. Now, I say that not to criticise him politically, much as I would like to, but to give I guess, to reaffirm the reality that there is an intended, needed amount of housing supply in London, and then there's a reality, which is that only about 20 to 25% of that gets built. So again, we're back to the supply-demand argument. If you're thinking over the next 3, 4, 5 years, given that London is such a magnetic city, it's such a honeypot, you're going to have huge influx of people, lots of professionals, lots and lots of people to the financial districts, to tech and so on, whatever. And unfortunately, an undersupply continually of property in the capital.
Good. Well, thank you very much for Russell for joining us today. London Property Insider is your newest and best podcast, And hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you at the next one. Thank you very much.